Today we'll discover the benefits of compost bins so you can make compost faster, reduce pest problems, make better use of your space, turn your compost more efficiently, and keep the neighbors happy. Plus, I'll share tips on what to consider when building or buying compost bins. So let's join a workshop I hosted on this very topic. So I'm often asked, hey Marion, what does your compost bin setup look like? So today you get a private tour of my composting area. This is my happy place. In addition to starting seeds, this is a big happy place for me. Now, you might be on the fence, I get it, about composting, and that's okay. You might be wondering, is it worth having compost bins? In my 35 years or so of making compost, that would be an emphatic yes. So if you're thinking of building compost bins or changing your current setup, say from a tumbler to bins, or relocating your current or existing bins, I think you're going to find some really helpful ideas in what I'm about to share. I have found that there are basically seven benefits of compost bins. So making compost in a bin is a much more efficient use of space. Now, bins also help speed up the decomposition process. And a bin minimizes issues with pests and rodents like rats and so on. And bins help regulate moisture and air. This is very important to have the right amount of air and moisture to keep your compost going, that decomposition process going. A bin makes it easier to turn your compost, and it keeps materials kind of tidy and contained. In other words, they look a lot nicer than a pile of stuff heaped up in the corner of your yard. But before we dive in here, keep in mind that my compost career originated from pretty humble beginnings. I mean, it was a process, like many things in gardening, right? Rome wasn't built in a day. So remember, you don't have to get it perfect. You just have to get it going. So here's what my first compost pile looked like. Woohoo! 2 wooden pallets and a fence. Pretty basic, but it worked. Even in February in Alaska, and it was snowing. How do you like my pink scarf, by the way? This photo was taken in 1985, and I've been making compost ever since. Here's the before picture of what we were able to accomplish with compost. And now the after picture. This is what our garden looks like now. So here's what we're going to do. Because there's a lot of conflicting information out there about composting, we're going to do this in steps. So first I'll show you the big overall picture of our composting setup. And then we'll take a closer look at a single bin. I think this will help clear up some confusion you might have about composting in general. Are you ready? Okay, follow the dots. 1, to keep the compost and our cells from getting soaked from wind-driven rain, we covered the working area with a super strong, I think it's a polycarbonate material, super strong. So that's our overhead roof. 2, now this shows the main shed, you know, the lawnmower and weed whacker or string cutter, tarps and pitchforks, shovels and rakes. Well, you know how it goes. And this is a hung door, like a barn door. This is a hung door. 3 as in 3 bins. Now each bin measures 3 by 3 by 3 feet. That's because a cubic yard is really the minimum size you need for making hot compost. And this is one of the keys for shortening the time it takes to get finished compost. I mean, you can have finished compost in 6 weeks. So you might be wondering, is a wooden or a plastic compost bin better? So in my experience, I prefer wood bins for our compost bins. And here's why. Wood is a natural material. It provides better insulation when making compost. And wood blends, well, it blends in nicely with the outdoor setting. And here's the biggie, it's resistant to cracking or shattering or breaking in extreme temperatures, or maybe it's not UV light resistant. So what kind of wood is best for compost bins? Well, I'd say any untreated wood is best. I mean, here in Kodiak, Alaska, we use, I think it's just local spruce, local Sitka spruce, which lasts for many years, really. Now, you don't need 3 bins. This is just an FYI. You can start with 1 bin and expand later. So, do compost bins need bottoms? So take a look. The path you see on the left here, that's the one in front of the bins. That's a hard surface, but inside the bins, it's a dirt floor. Now, a hard floor, I must admit, makes it easier to kind of scrape the last little bits of material, but either way works fine. So on to 4. If you take a look above the compost bins, you can see that we added shelving. Now, this is a really convenient place to store gardening supplies like seed starting pots and trays and compost thermometers. Then to the right of the compost bins is where we store scrap plywood and repurposed like that 1-inch insulation, that foam insulation for covering the bins. Now, in a moment, I'll talk about why it's important to cover your compost piles. So let's take a closer look at a single bin so you can really see the features. 1, you see that flat horizontal board? We added that cap for chopping and smashing things like thick broccoli stems and tall perennials, and that way they just fall right into the bin. 2, this shows a plywood panel. We lined each bin with plywood. Now, we didn't start out with wood. We learned the hard way. So most compost designs and plans recommend installing 1/2-inch hardware cloth, right? Or screen. That's along the back, the outer sides, and in between the bins themselves. The idea, I think, is it's supposed to provide good air circulation. Now, in my experience, though, this only created a big mess. For example, when I turned the compost, the pitchfork tines jammed into the holes in the screen. And then plus, over time, we found that leaves and grass and bits of seaweed got poked in there and then kind of fell out the back, and it just got kind of messy. So we covered up the hardware cloth with sections of plywood. Now, no more jammed pitchfork tines. In fact, I liked the wood-lined bins much better because it makes turning the compost so much easier and scraping down the sides so much easier overall. So I just love it. What about air circulation then? It's supposed to be the point to have screens. Well, again, in my experience, it's best anyway to build your compost pile all at one time and not in dribs and drabs. After I build the compost pile, on day 2 is when I turn it. And then I continue turning the compost on a schedule for the entire 6 weeks. And that way I get plenty, or the materials get plenty of air circulation by simply turning it, completely turning it. So I hope that helps. Now for the lid or the cover. Should compost bins have a lid? Well, in addition to the clear roof you saw earlier, we cover each one of the active piles with a piece of plywood or that 1-inch insulation foam, hard foam. A piece of carpet works fine too. So here are 4 benefits to covering your compost piles. First, the cover will ride down as the compost breaks down. It helps you keep track kind of visually. You can watch as to how fast the compost is breaking down or the materials are breaking down. It's kind of like keeping track of your kids or grandkids. You have them step against the wall and you put a little ruler there and you just mark the top of their head on the wall so you can keep track of their growth. Now you might be wondering, how much will a compost pile break down before it's done? Well, most people don't realize that before an active compost pile is finished or ready to use, the pile will actually shrink by 1/3 or a half of its original size. So this is one of your clues, by the way, to know when your compost is really done. Number 2 is covering your compost helps reduce moisture loss. Water is really crucial because in order for the microbes who are doing all the work while you sleep to stay healthy and do all that work, they need 3 things, kind of like us. They need food, they need water, and they need air. Without water, your compost dries up, the microbes die, and everything comes to a screeching halt. So number 3, a cover on your compost pile helps maintain heat within the pile. Remember, it's not the outside heat that's important. It's the heat within the pile that really keeps things going. Number 4, covering your compost with a lid provides a convenient support for a thermometer. And you just poke a hole in the center and you can see, oh, by the way, so you can see there's a little guy right there. That's Compost Cowboy. So speaking of compost thermometers, you see that orange ring right there? That protects that main dial and it makes it easier to grab the thermometer and pull it out and push it into the hole through the cover. By the way, when it comes to making compost, a thermometer is your best friend. Without it, well, I kind of liken it to trying to vacuum your floor in the dark. And if you look closely, there's Compost Cowboy. He's hanging out there. I found him face down in a patch of kelp when I was collecting seaweed for the compost. Number 5. Now, these horizontal boards, they're 2x6s. They're repurposed wood plank. Why movable boards? Well, they make composting so much easier. I'll show you why. The boards are held in place. Take a look at number 6. There's 2 of them there. The boards are held in place by the vertical slots on either side. You see that? You can slide the planks up and down as you build the pile, or you can pull them out as the compost sinks, or when you're getting ready to scoop it out and add it to your garden. Alrighty. I hope getting a backstage look at our composting setup answers some of your questions. Finally, I'll leave you with this. So compost is the all-purpose answer to everything. And if you have enough of it, you won't need much of anything else. Okay, have a great rest of your weekend. So we'll be in touch real soon. Okay,